The Human Rights Commission is calling on Chinese authorities to investigate the alleged ill treatment of African nationals in that country. The Commission will soon engage with a network of African human rights institutes on the matter. African migrants recently spoke out against forced evictions, quarantines and discrimination in restaurants and hotels amid COVID-19. To discuss this further, we are joined via Skype by Advocate Tseliso Thipanyane, who is the CEO of the South African Human Rights Commission. Thanks for joining us, Tseliso. It's great to have you.
Good morning to you and your viewers.
We've seen videos of this nature go viral on social media, and obviously, you know, we get angered by what we see. But let's get the response from the Human Rights Commission as to this outcry that is being heard around the world with regard to the treatment of Africans in China.
Well, thank you. The Commission is actually committed to fighting against the human rights violations, including racism. And therefore, what we have noticed happening in China is of serious concern to us. And hence, a statement we've issued calling on our government, as well as our colleagues all over Africa, in national human rights institutions all over Africa, to basically put pressure on the Chinese authority to ensure that this comes to an end, because it really undermines all the efforts which are needed at this point in time to address COVID-19 all over the world.
Yeah. You know, and what's quite baffling to come out of these videos and interviews is that many of these Africans, from whichever country they come from, have been living in China for over 20 years. Is this simply xenophobia that has sat dormant for years?
To a large extent, we can say that because, you know, it's only black people who are being targeted, well, who appear to be targeted mainly. And therefore, this really raises concern that there might be some form of latent racism which has been happening in China, which needs to be rooted out and exposed and be addressed. Because, you know, China is a very important trading partner of our country as well as the continent.
Yeah.
As a whole.
I mean, that can't be disputed. I mean, it's a massive trading partner, and this could very much so hurt relations between the countries if something isn't sorted out. You know, there's been a couple of assumptions out there saying that Chinese have actually been led to believe that Africans are the carriers of this virus. I mean, can you believe a narrative like that?
Well, you see, this is a problem with racial prejudice and racism, or even gender bias, is that, you know, there are always these irrational thoughts about certain people. You know, if you are black, you are all the negativities about life are attributed to you. And this is what's happening. So it really needs to be addressed, because as information shows that COVID-19 began in China. So how can people now suddenly be blamed as being the carriers of this virus? Look at the stats globally compared to Africa and Europe and in Asia. So it's just another irrational views which, you know, people have due to racial prejudices, which really have to be addressed and strongly be condemned.
Yeah, I mean, this was something that you found that a lot of Chinese expats or generally Asian citizens had experienced around the world, that there was suddenly this racism towards them because, you know, we do know that it originated in China, in Wuhan, and this was reported on extensively, and there was an outcry as to how a lot of Asians were singled out and how they had been discriminated against. Now suddenly there's this different scenario coming out in Asia where Africans are being ill-treated, and the reality is exactly what you said. If you look at the statistics, the continent of Africa compared to the rest of the world is faring very, very well when it comes to infections.
Yeah, so it's very important that really we educate everybody else. I mean, can you imagine if the reverse was happening in our country, where the Chinese began being targets? That will be completely unacceptable. And we've been hoping that, you know, we'll not see this kind of racial stereotypes around coronavirus, you know, because of people's fears. Yeah. And that's why we need to stand out very strongly and condemn and really urge all authorities to ensure that, you know, stereotyping around COVID-19 should not happen.
Yeah. I mean, I had seen many Chinese citizens that are living here in South Africa actually speaking out against it and saying that they've also been ill-treated, but that was condemned in the strongest possible terms immediately. So, you know, this is really rearing a very horrible side in the world again, is this issue of racism and how people just prejudge you. They automatically look at you without you even opening your mouth, and they have judged you. And this is, this is blatant racism, and it's something that we've seen happening over and over again. Is coronavirus another instance where this is just showing how divided and racist this world really is?
Yes, the COVID-19 is actually exposing many fault lines in our society at a political level, social level, and therefore it's also very important that we really reflect, all of us going forward, as to how do we conduct ourselves at the global level to ensure that, we do live to those ideals that human rights are universal.
I recently had an interview with the charge d'affaires of the Chinese embassy to South Africa, and it was quite a frustrating interview, to say the least. He claimed no knowledge of this issue. And he basically later came on and made a couple of vague comments saying that they would look into it, and it sort of seemed to know what I was talking about, but he didn't really. And whereas these videos are doing the rounds, and it is there, and people are talking to it, and we've been contacted by South Africans, and yet there were denials and denials coming out after each other. Do you believe that the HRC will have any luck with Chinese authorities?
Well, global international solidarity will always work. So far, a number of countries have already issued expression about this. The U.S. State Department has issued a statement, the Botswana government, and many African governments have done so. And therefore, even this interview should also, bring the message home that at this point in time, we really need unity at a global level to address these issues. And therefore, I think with sufficient pressure from all over the world, the message will get through, and the Chinese authority should do the right thing, because there are many things at stake here going forward.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of speaking out from the Kenyan government, from the Nigerian government, also the South African government, because these are some of the citizens that have been on the receiving end of some of this racism. Have you had engagement, or what engagements will you be having in future, if not already, with a network of African human rights institutions?
We do communicate with them. Certainly we'll reach out to them. With statement has been issued, our statement goes on internet, and colleagues are always in touch with us. Last year, if you recall, when there were incidents of xenophobia in our country, our own president had to send a delegation to Nigeria, to express, concerns about these issues. So we also expect the Chinese government to come out much strongly. Of course, human beings all over the world will always behave in strange ways, but it is the responsibility of every government on earth to stand up for the ideals which we have signed for under the UN Charter and all other international instruments, including the one against racism all over the world. In 2001, we hosted the World Conference here on racism in South Africa. And Chinese government was here as well, condemning global racism. So they also have to then live up to those ideals and commitments they make.
Certainly is. And just finally, the last question to you is, this has reached the level of the African Union, and we saw the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi saying that it would be addressed, this issue of racism. But how should it be addressed? What needs to be done from the Chinese side?
Well, like most responsible governments, the Chinese government will have to send out messages that this is not okay, but also, deal with those who are responsible. Like, there was pressure on us to respond to issues of xenophobia. So the Chinese government knows what to do, and they should be seen to be doing that in order to allay concerns that, there's another form of racial stereotyping against Africans or black people in particular.
Advocate, we'll leave it there for this morning. Thanks so much for talking to us. Advocate Tseliso Thipanyane, the CEO of the South African Human Rights Commission, talking to us about the need for China to investigate alleged racism against African nationals in that country because of the COVID-19 pandemic.